Inheritance is a blood sport. My grandmother didn't believe in unconditional love. She believed in incentives. Her will is a masterpiece of conditional generosity. A $50 million trust fund released equally to her 4 grandchildren, but only if, in the sole judgment of her family office, we all remain in good standing. Good standing. It sounds so polite. It's not. It's a cage. It means no scandals, no arrests, no conduct unbecoming. It means we are each other's keepers and each other's greatest threat. Sloane, watching security footage on a laptop, her face lit by the blue glow. Julian, slipping an unmarked prescription bottle into a brother's coat pocket at a charity gala. Colette, tearfully giving a statement to a stern-looking man in a suit. Emmett, receiving a grainy, compromising photo on his phone, his face draining of color. Because if just one of us falls, the pot is split 3 ways. If 2 fall, it's split in half. We are 4 people who shared a nursery, now engaged in a silent, bloodless war. Julian plants evidence. Colette files false reports. Emmett hires investigators. And me? I watch. I compile. I know every dirty secret, every hidden debt, every betrayal. I thought I could stay above it. Just monitor, ensure my own survival. But the clause has a final, brutal twist if all other beneficiaries are disqualified. The last one standing gets everything. They started this. They made it a game. But I know how to win. The only way to secure your inheritance is to destroy your family. Before we start the story, please tell me about the story, in the end or wherever you left. Just tell me why you are leaving, what you want me to improve about the stories, even if you don't like the story. Just let me know why you didn't like the story. I will be very thankful to you. Now let's move towards the story. Grandmother's fortune was a chemical compound, stable on its own, but combine it with family and apply the pressure of a deadline, and it becomes explosively toxic. The final quarterly review before the trust matured was that pressure cooker. The offices of Sterling and Vale, trustees, smelled of money. Not the green, earthy smell of cash, but the sterile, filtered scent of preserved wealth, lemon wood polish, starched linen, and chilled air. I sat in the same cream leather chair I'd occupied every 3 months for the past 5 years, legs crossed at the ankle, a neutral mask on my face, the uniform of the dutiful beneficiary. Across the glass and chrome table, my siblings were studies in performative virtue. Julian, the eldest at 32, had adopted the posture of a young statesman. Charcoal suit, no tie, open collar projecting busy important. He was scrolling through his phone with a slight frown, the picture of a man burdened by weighty concerns, likely the logistics of his latest venture capital flirtation, which was, as always, more venture than capital. Colette, 30 and brittle as fine china, sat with her hands folded in her lap, back so straight it looked painful. Her smile was a tight, practiced curve for the benefit of the hidden security camera she'd once pointed out to me with a paranoid whisper. She was the public face of our generation, head of the family's charitable foundation, a permanent fixture on the 30 under 30 philanthropy lists. Her dossier, I knew, was the thinnest. On paper, she was spotless. Paper was easy to curate. Then there was Emmett, 28, a beautiful, spoiled disaster. He slouched, radiating a carefully constructed aura of artistic negligence, ripped designer jeans, a paint-splattered jacket he'd likely stained that morning for effect. He was humming tunelessly, tapping a beat on the arm of his chair. His dossier was a saga. DUIs quietly settled. Rehab stints, the discreet, spa-like kind. A cocaine habit he thought was a secret, but which Julian had documented in excruciatingly petty detail and filed anonymously with the trustees 6 months ago. Emmett was the obvious weak link, the sacrificial lamb everyone assumed would be culled, allowing the rest of us to split his share. I was the watcher. Sloane, 29, the second eldest, the family archivist. My role, self-appointed and utterly necessary, was to know everything. Not to act, not yet, but to understand the battlefield. I ran a boutique security consultancy for the paranoid wealthy. It gave me access to tools, and more importantly, a rationale for my natural inclination toward surveillance. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. Mr. Sterling entered, a man carved from old banknotes and tempered glass. He carried 4 files. Our lives reduced to quarterly bullet points. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice like a vault door closing. "This will be the final review prior to the maturation event. As you know, the good standing clause remains in full effect. Any material adverse change in status before the distribution date nullifies the beneficiary's share, which is then redistributed among the remaining qualified parties." He said the same thing every time. It never lost its chilling weight. He opened the first file. Julian. The inquiry into the venture fund's regulatory compliance has been resolved. Julian didn't look up from his phone. As I said it would be. A misunderstanding with an overzealous junior analyst. He'd had a lawyer, a very expensive, very connected lawyer, make that misunderstanding disappear. I'd seen the invoice. It had been paid from a shadow account I was still trying to fully trace. Cost of doing business, or cost of staying in good standing. Sterling made a note. "Very well. Colette, the Foundation's annual audit is clean. However, there is a minor, ongoing civil matter from the terminated employee alleging a hostile work environment." Colette's smile didn't waver. "A frivolous lawsuit from a disgruntled former grant writer. My legal team assures me it will be dismissed with prejudice next month. It's a nuisance, nothing more. A nuisance she'd likely orchestrated to make the eventual dismissal look like a victory." I'd tapped the former employee's phone for 2 weeks. The settlement negotiations were already underway, buried under 6 layers of shell nonprofits. Sterling nodded, a man accustomed to nuisances that cost 6 figures to squash. Then Emmett's file. Sterling's lips thinned almost imperceptibly. Emmett, the possession charges from Ibiza. Emmett stopped humming. Misdemeanor. Expunged. A Spanish lawyer your office recommended was most efficient. He shot a look of pure venom at Julian, who had undoubtedly been the one to ensure the trustees found out about the arrest in the first place. And the ongoing outpatient treatment, Sterling pressed. A commitment to wellness, Emmett said, the words sounding rehearsed. Preventative care. My therapist's reports are available to the office, as per the stipulation. He was white-knuckling the arms of his chair. His therapist, Dr. Armitage, was on Julian's payroll. I knew because I paid his secretary more. Sterling studied him for a long moment before turning the final page. Very well. Continued adherence is expected. He closed the file. The unspoken words hung in the air. You are on the thinnest of ice. Then he opened the last file. Mine. Sloane, your consultancy's client list has expanded more. Notably, you've taken on the security portfolio for the DeKalb family. A fact, not a question. The DeKalbs were old money, older than ours and famously litigious. A high-profile, high-risk client. A test. Their systems were a sieve, I said. My voice calm, professional. I plugged the holes. Their review is on record. It was a 5-star, gushing review. I'd also, as a courtesy, uncovered that their youngest son was embezzling from the family holding company. I presented the evidence discreetly to the patriarch. My retainer tripled. Loyalty purchased. Sterling gave a single, slow nod, the closest he came to approval. No other matters. Your standing is satisfactory. The meeting ended with the usual inhuman pleasantries. We filed out into the marble hallway, the temporary ceasefire dissolving with every step. Julian fell into step beside me, his phone finally pocketed. Emmett's barely clinging on, he murmured, not looking at me. One more stumble. One more stumble. A missed therapy session. A failed piss test. It would be a mercy, really. The money would kill him. Are you offering mercy, Julian? Or just a bigger share? I kept my eyes forward. He smiled. A thin, financial model of a smile. Efficiency isn't cruelty, Sloane. It's pragmatism. You of all people should understand that. Ahead of us, Colette linked her arm through Emmett's, a show of sisterly support. You were so brave in there, she cooed, loud enough for us to hear. Ignoring all that negativity. We're so proud of your progress. Her grip on his arm was vice-tight. She was propping him up, keeping him just stable enough to be her shield. If Julian took out Emmett, Colette would be the next obvious target. Her game was preservation of the herd, for now. Emmett shook her off, his face pale with rage and shame. Just leave me alone, Colette. He stormed ahead toward the elevator. That night, in my apartment with its view of the city's glittering arteries, I reviewed the feeds. Camera in Julian's study showed him reviewing a report from a private investigator. Photos of Emmett entering a known dealer's apartment building from 2 nights ago. He was building his case. Colette's encrypted chat with her lawyer discussed accelerating the settlement with the former employee, adding a strict non-disclosure agreement that would also cover any observations of personal conduct during employment. She was sewing shut loose lips, covering flanks. Emmett was on the phone, crying, to someone named Mateo. I can't keep doing this, mate. They're like vultures. I feel like I'm going to scream. I sipped my whiskey. the ice clinking softly in the silence. The final quarter. The pressure was achieving critical mass. Julian was on the offensive. Colette was fortifying. Emmett was cracking. And I had files on all of them. Julian's hidden debt, the one his shiny VC facade was built upon, Colette's little habit of redirecting foundation funds to cover her personal interior designer's exorbitant invoices, Emmett's everything. I had believed knowledge was power, that by holding all the secrets, I could control the explosion, direct the shrapnel away from myself. But as I watched Emmett's tear-streaked face on the monitor, a cold new calculus formed in my mind. The clause wasn't just a deterrent. It was an algorithm, a sick, brutal formula where the optimal outcome was not mutual survival, but singular victory. If all other beneficiaries are disqualified, the last one standing gets everything. It wasn't an incentive to keep each other safe. It was a blueprint for a last sibling standing deathmatch. Grandmother, in her infinite conditional love, had weaponized our inheritance. I closed the feeds as city lights blurred into a river of cold fire. The game was no longer about defending. Julian was right about one thing. Emmett's fall was inevitable. The question was, who would benefit? And a more terrifying question whispered in its wake. If ensuring my own survival meant actively helping one of them push him, would I do it? The first move was coming. I could feel it in the sterile, charged air. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I would just watch. The first rule of a silent war: you don't fire the shot. You hand the gun to someone else and point them in the right direction. You make tragedy look like an accident, or better yet, like their own damn fault. The pressure found its release valve at Colette's spring renewal gala for the foundation, a cavernous downtown art museum, all white walls and echoing laughter, where the price of entry was a donation large enough to absolve a minor sin. Our family had a table at the front, a gilded cage on display. I wore black, not for mourning, but for camouflage. From my seat, I had a sightline to the entire tragicomedy. Julian worked the room like a politician, his laugh too loud, his handshakes too firm. He was selling the narrative of the responsible heir, the steady hand. Colette floated between donors, a vision in pale lavender, her smile a practiced beam of altruism. Every glance she shot toward our table, where Emmett was already on his third glass of champagne, was a tiny, controlled pulse of anxiety. Emmett was a live wire in a room full of kindling. The outpatient treatment was clearly not taking. His eyes had a glassy sheen. His movements were just a beat too slow, too deliberate. He was trying to perform wellness, but the performance was cracking under the spotlight he hated. I saw the moment Julian identified his weapon. A sleek, sharp-faced woman named Vanessa, a society columnist whose whispers could curdle a reputation overnight. Julian guided her to our table with a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of intimate alliance. "Vanessa, you remember my brother Emmett, the talented painter?" Julian's voice was all brotherly pride. Emmett looked up, a deer sensing the hunter. Yeah, hi. Julian's been telling me about your new series," Vanessa purred, sliding into the empty seat next to him, exploring dissolution and altered states. Was it? So brave. She placed her phone on the table, recording light discreetly off, voice memo app open. A predator's tool. I took a sip of ice water, my senses dialed to 11. This was it. Julian wasn't waiting for a stumble. He was laying a trap. It's about perception, Emmett mumbled, defensive. Not that. Of course, Vanessa smiled, all teeth. But your work has always drawn from personal experience, hasn't it? The raw material of life. Like your time in Marbella last summer? Or was it Ibiza? I hear the light is so illuminating there. She was baiting him, poking the bruise of his arrest, seeing if he'd lash out or confess. Julian stood slightly behind her, watching with the cool interest of a scientist, observing a reaction. I had a choice. I could let it happen. Emmett, cornered and self-medicated, would inevitably say something regrettable. Vanessa would have her quote. Julian would have his material adverse change. The redistribution would begin. But the clause's final brutal arithmetic echoed in my head. If all other beneficiaries are disqualified, letting Julian win this round only strengthened him. It didn't get me closer to the ultimate prize. It just made a more powerful enemy. I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping softly on the polished concrete. Vanessa, I said, my voice cutting through their tense little circle. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Colette needs Emmett for a donor photo, family solidarity moment. I gave her a bland, professional smile. You know how these things are. Vanessa's eyes flickered with annoyance, but she couldn't challenge a direct pull from the hostess. Of course. We'll talk later, Emmett. I didn't touch Emmett. I just looked at him. Now, Emmett, he stumbled to his feet, relief and confusion warring on his face. I steered him away, not toward Colette, but toward a service hallway behind a towering abstract sculpture. What the hell, Sloane? He slurred. Shut up, I hissed, checking the hall for cameras. One in the corner. I positioned us in its blind spot, behind a fire extinguisher case. Julian just set you up with Vanessa Kane. She was recording every word. You were about 5 seconds away from giving her a headline that would have gotten you disinherited by breakfast. The color drained from his face, the champagne buzz turning to nausea. He wouldn't. He just did. I kept my voice low, urgent. He's not your brother right now, Emmett. He's a competitor, and you're the easiest target. Tears welled in his eyes, pathetic and real. I can't do this. They're all waiting for me to fail. This was the moment, the pivot. Not to save him, but to redirect the falling masonry. Then stop failing on their terms, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Julian's got a skeleton, a big one. He's leveraged to his eyeballs. The venture fund is a shell, propped up by loans he took against his future trust distribution. If the trustees found out he was effectively insolvent, borrowing against an asset he doesn't yet control, that's a massive conflict. A breach of fiduciary duty to his own future. That's conduct unbecoming. That's a disqualification. Emmett's bleary eyes widened. How do you know that? Because it's my job to know things. I let that hang. The documents are in a secure cloud drive, password protected, but his assistant is impressionable. and she has access. I was handing him the gun, a clean, anonymous tip to the trustees about Julian's financial house of cards. A move that would come from the shadows, not from me. Emmett would have his revenge, and I would have Julian neutralized. A spark of something ugly and grateful ignited in Emmett's gaze. The victim becoming the aggressor. The password? I leaned closer, my lips nearly brushing his ear, and whispered a string of characters. His birthday, our grandmother's maiden name, the street number of our childhood home. Pathetically obvious for a man who thought himself so clever. Don't use your own devices, I instructed. Go to a library. Use a burner email. Make it untraceable. He nodded, a shaky, frantic movement. Okay, I will. Good. I patted his shoulder, a mockery of comfort. Now go to the bathroom. Splash water on your face. Then go find Colette and smile for the cameras. Be the family. I watched him stagger off, a missile I'd just armed and aimed. The controlled demolition had begun. Julian's attack had been deflected, and the force of it was now channeled back toward him. I returned to the gala, the music and chatter washing over me. Colette shot me a questioning, anxious look. I gave her a slight, reassuring nod. Everything is under control. Her smile tightened, unsure if I was an ally or another threat. An hour later, the deed was done. I knew because the alert on Julian's primary email, an alert he didn't know I had, pinged on my watch. A priority message from the Sterling and Vale office. Request for urgent meeting regarding financial disclosures. I allowed myself a small, private sip of champagne. Phase 1. But warfare never goes according to a single plan. As the gala wound down, Colette cornered me near the coat check, her lavender gown seeming to glow in the dim light. "What did you say to Emmett?" she demanded, her whisper like steam. He came back, focused. Not sober, but focused. It was unnatural. "I told him to behave," I said blandly, "for the family." "Don't lie to me, Sloane." Her eyes, usually so wide and placid, were sharp with a fear she couldn't name. "I saw you with him. You're planning something. Is it Julian?" "It is, isn't it?" A frantic hope dawned on her face. "You're going after Julian." I said nothing. Let her believe what she needed. "If you have something on him, we could work together," she breathed, leaning in. "If he goes down, it's better for everyone, for the family's reputation, for the foundation." For her share, she meant. With Julian gone, she'd only have Emmett and me to worry about. And in her mind, Emmett was already a ghost. "I work alone, Colette." The words burst from her, a rare loss of control. "Don't you see the math? It's not about staying in. It's about being the last one left in. Grandmother didn't want a family. She wanted a winner." She gripped my wrist, her nails biting. "Partner with me. Take down Julian. Then we manage the Emmett situation together." The Emmett situation. She said it like a logistics problem, a pest infestation. I peeled her fingers off my arm. "You've misunderstood me, Colette. I'm not playing to win. I'm playing to survive." I walked away, leaving her standing there in her beautiful, desperate dress. 2 moves made. Emmett was armed against Julian. Colette was now openly aligned against him. A useful distraction. The battlefield was shifting. Back in my apartment, I watched the feeds. Julian was in his study, face ashen, yelling into the phone at his lawyer. Emmett was in a dark club, celebrating with Matteo, his laughter too loud, too manic. Colette was at home, shredding documents in her personal office, her face a mask of grim determination. They were all in motion, reacting, fighting each other. I pulled up the deepest file. The one not on my siblings, but on the trust itself, on the Sterling and Vale protocols, on the exact legal definitions of good standing and material adverse change. There was a clause, buried in subsection 14.2, about evidence of collusion to induce disqualification. It was the nuclear option. If the trustees believed beneficiaries were conspiring to sabotage each other, they could freeze the entire trust, litigate for years, possibly void it entirely. It was grandmother's final safeguard, a threat meant to keep us in line. But every safeguard has a trigger, and as I watched my family tear itself apart, a new, more elegant solution began to form. Not to eliminate them one by one, but to make the trustees believe we'd all broken the ultimate rule, to make them disqualify everyone. Except, of course, for the one beneficiary who could prove she'd been a victim of the collusion, not a participant. The one who had documented it all from the start. The last one standing. Trust is the first casualty. Then comes truth by the end. You're not even sure of your own motives. Are you fighting to survive, or because you've discovered you just like to win? The fallout from Julian's urgent meeting was a quiet, seismic event. He didn't lose his standing, not yet. Sterling and Vale were surgeons, not butchers. They applied a tourniquet, a temporary freeze on his ability to use the trust as collateral, a demand for full forensic accounting, and a stern, unrecorded warning that smelled like last chances. It was a public flogging in a private room. His reputation within the only circle that mattered to him, the cold, judging eyes of the trustees, was in tatters. He knew he'd been sabotaged, and in our world, there were only 3 possible suspects. He went for Colette first. It was the obvious play. She was the one with the most to gain from his stumble, the one whose pristine image was a direct critique of his messy ambition. I watched through the digital tendrils I had in his life as he hired a forensic accountant of his own to pick apart the Foundation's books. He was looking for a knife to match the one in his back. He found a scalpel. Not the redirected funds I knew about. Colette was too careful for that. But a pattern. Excessive payments to a crisis management PR firm that specialized in reputation laundering for politicians and C-list celebrities. The firm had buried 2 drunk driving incidents for a congressman's son and a #MeToo allegation against a tech CEO. And they'd invoiced the Hope Springs Eternal Foundation over $600,000 in the past 18 months. Julian didn't confront her. He published a sleek, anonymous leak to the same digital gossip rag Vanessa Kane wrote for. The headline was vicious: Philanthropy or Perception Management. Inside the foundation that buries scandals. It wasn't a crime, but it was a spectacular violation of our unspoken rule. You handle your messes in-house. You don't air the family's dirty laundry where the trustees and the world can see it. You don't poison the well everyone drinks from. Colette's response was a masterpiece of counterattack. She didn't deny it. She reframed, a tearful, perfectly staged press conference on the foundation's steps. She spoke of the tragic burden of wealth, of how she used the family's resources not just to grant wishes, but to offer second chances and restorative privacy to those caught in the public eye. She painted herself as a compassionate fixer, a savior. The article, she claimed, was a cynical attack from those who didn't understand modern philanthropy or family. The public ate it up. She trended for a day. Her donations spiked. But Stirling and Vale didn't care about trends. They cared about risk. Colette had just admitted to using foundation funds for purposes far outside its charitable mandate. She'd made the family name synonymous with scandal management. A notice of inquiry appeared in her file. Her standing, once the most solid, was now under review. The war was no longer silent. It was a shouting match in a glass house, and everyone was throwing stones. Emmett, emboldened by his successful strike against Julian and seeing blood in the water, made his move. It was clumsy, desperate. He tried to get ahead of his own chaos. He went to the trustees voluntarily, with his therapist, Dr. Armitage, in tow. He presented a narrative of a man besieged by addiction, yes, but more so by the sabotage and unbearable pressure from his siblings, specifically Julian's relentless campaigns to undermine him. It was a play for sympathy, for the status of a victim, a plea that his failures were induced, not inherent. He didn't know that Dr. Armitage's loyalty had a price tag, and Julian had just doubled my retainer. The therapist's supplemental report, filed confidentially an hour after Emmett's meeting, noted paranoid ideation, a propensity to blame external forces for self-created problems, and possible manipulation of the therapeutic relationship to fabricate narratives of persecution. Emmett hadn't stabilized his standing. He'd handed them a clinical diagnosis of his unreliability. The board was now in a state of perpetual, quiet crisis. 3 of the 4 heirs were actively toxic. I could imagine the emergency meetings, the grave faces around the conference table. The trust was a sleek ship heading for a cliff, with the passengers actively poking holes in the hull. Through it all, I played the ghost, the competent, neutral sibling. I met with Stirling to discuss estate security protocols in light of the unfortunate family tensions. I expressed measured concern for everyone's well-being. I was the only one not generating headlines, not filing counter charges, not weeping on camera. My dossier remained a monument to bland, profitable stability. I was becoming, in their eyes, the last sane one, the default. But default wasn't victory. The clause's brutal math still required disqualification. I needed the final push. I needed them to trip over the ultimate line, collusion. So, I poisoned the well deeper. I created a ghost, digital persona, an anonymous email account, a voice modulator app, a cache of fabricated documents. This ghost reached out to Colette, posing as a concerned senior associate at Stirling and Vale. The message was simple. Julian was preparing a second fatal leak, not about the foundation, but about her. Evidence of her directing funds to silence a former lover who threatened to go public about their affair. The ghost offered her a chance, a preemptive strike. Evidence of Julian's insider trading during the VC fund's quiet period, mutually assured destruction. It was a lie. But it was a lie Colette, paranoid and backed into a corner, was primed to believe. Simultaneously, the ghost visited Julian. It warned him that Emmett, in a drug-fueled paranoia, was preparing to go to the police with false allegations of financial coercion, claiming Julian had forced him into rehab to control his share. The ghost offered Julian a countermeasure, evidence that Emmett's voluntary therapy was a sham, that he was bribing the clinic for clean reports. A lie for a liar. I didn't need them to act on the ghost's information. I just needed them to communicate, to reach out to each other with these poisoned offers, these threats disguised as alliances. And I needed a record. I gave them the perfect secret place to do it. A digital vault, a secure encrypted message board used by high net worth families for sensitive communications. A system I had designed and sold to Sterling and Vale the previous year. A system with a back door only its architect knew about. Julian took the bait first. A terse message to Colette. We need to talk. The Emmett situation is spiraling. He's making criminal allegations. Containment required. Colette, terrified of the fictional lover scandal, responded, Your leaks have caused enough damage. Call off your dogs, or I'll release what I have on your fund's IPO manipulations. They were negotiating. They were conspiring to contain Emmett, to manage the fallout, to protect their shares. It was exactly the language the trust's clause forbade. I harvested every word, timestamps, IP addresses, routed through proxies I'd provided them years ago for security. The damning lexicon of collusion. It was time to bring Emmett into the fold. Not as a player, but as the bomb. I met him at his studio, a cavernous loft reeking of turpentine and decay. He was a wreck, vibrating with anxiety. The fleeting power I'd given him long evaporated. They're teaming up against me, he whispered, pacing. Julian and Colette. They're going to have me committed or arrested. They're talking about it. I know, I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. I've seen the messages. He froze. How? Because I protect this family, even from itself. I looked at him with what I hoped was a convincing mix of pity and resolve. There's a way out, Emmett. A way to stop them both. To show the trustees exactly what they're doing. But you have to be brave. I handed him a tablet. On it was a fabricated email chain, one I'd created between Julian and a fictional clinical director, discussing the logistics of having Emmett involuntarily institutionalized based on his therapist's worrisome report. It was crude, but Emmett, in his raw, terrified state, didn't look for nuance. He saw the confirmation of his deepest fear. Take this to Sterling, I said. Go now. Show him you're being targeted, that they are colluding to force you out. It's your only chance. He took the tablet like a sacrament, his hands trembling. Will it work? It will expose the truth, I said, which was, technically, not a lie. He left, a martyr on a mission I'd written for him. I sat in the silence of his ruined studio, surrounded by paintings of fragmented faces and screaming colors. The pieces were in motion. Julian and Colette, locked in a secret pact to contain their brother, Emmett. storming into the trustee's office with evidence of a conspiracy against him. The well was thoroughly poisoned. The trustees would have no choice. They would see a family in open, covert war, violating the core tenet of the trust. They would see 3 beneficiaries conspiring to sabotage a 4th. All they would need was the final piece of evidence, the architect of the conspiracy. And I had the perfect candidate. Not me, the ghost. I would hand them the ghost, trace it back to a server, to a digital fingerprint, one that would lead, through a labyrinth I'd built, right back to a single, desperate, calculating source. I looked at the half-finished painting on Emmett's easel. It was a self-portrait, his own face dissolving into a storm of dark brushstrokes. Soon, I thought, soon they'll all be disqualified, and I'll be left standing in the silence, the sole heir to a fortune built on conditional love. The only condition I had left to meet was being the last one loyal, even if I had to fabricate everyone else's betrayal to prove it. In the end, you don't win the game. You redefine the rules so that you were the only one ever playing. Victory isn't a triumph. It's a perfectly staged crime scene where you're the sole survivor. The collapse was not a thunderclap. It was the slow, sickening crack of glacial ice calving into a silent sea. It happened in the sterile, soundproofed rooms of Sterling and Vale, far from the public eye. Emmett's hysterical delivery of the involuntary commitment emails triggered a mandatory, full-scale audit, not just of his claims, but of all inter-beneficiary communications pertaining to the trust. The clause demanded it. The ghost's encrypted message board, the supposed secure channel, was subpoenaed. They found Julian and Colette's damning exchange. Containment required. Call off your dogs. IPO manipulations. The language was unambiguous. A conspiracy to influence the standing of a 3rd beneficiary. A direct, flagrant violation. Simultaneously, the forensic trail of the ghost, the anonymous provocateur who'd fed them both lies, was followed. I had made the path elegant but not invisible. It led through a series of offshore servers and dummy corporations to a final encrypted laptop. A laptop registered to a shell company whose sole director was, according to fabricated but flawless paperwork, Julian's embittered former business partner from the VC fund. It was the masterstroke. Julian wasn't just conspiring with Colette. He was the secret architect of the entire sabotage campaign, manipulating everyone from the shadows to clear the field. The narrative was perfect. It explained his aggression, his preemptive strike on Colette, his fixation on Emmett. It painted him as a Machiavellian genius, ruthless enough to win, but sloppy enough to get caught. Sterling called me in first. His office felt like a tomb for a dead idea, the idea of our family as a worthy vessel for grandmother's wealth. "Sloane," he said, his voice hollow with a fatigue no amount of money could cure. "Your siblings. The evidence of collusion is incontrovertible. The Trust's Clause 14.2 is invoked." I allowed a flicker of shock, of grief, to cross my face. The performance of a lifetime. All of them? The communications between Julian and Colette are explicit. Julian's culpability as the instigator is heavily implied by the digital forensics. Emmett, he sighed. Emmett is a casualty. But his instability, his attempts to manipulate his own standing with false allegations. He is not a reliable party. The board cannot, in good faith, distribute funds to any of them. The risk of litigation, of further scandal, is catastrophic. He studied me. A last, lingering look. Your file is clean. Your client reviews are exemplary. You have raised no allegations, engaged in no visible conflict. You are, by default and by review, in good standing. The words hung in the air. The goal, the prize. I didn't smile. I bowed my head, as if bearing the weight of a tragedy. What happens now? The trust will be frozen, pending the outcome of arbitration with the other beneficiaries. It will be lengthy, ugly, but the clause is clear. Their shares are forfeit. In the absence of any other qualified beneficiary, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. I was the last one standing. I left Sterling's office, a queen of ashes. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of silent, legal tsunamis. Julian was served with a thick packet of allegations at his club. I watched, via a camera in the lobby, as his face transformed from arrogant annoyance to blind, disbelieving rage. He screamed at the process server, then crumpled into a leather armchair, staring into the middle distance. His empire, built on leverage and lies, had just had its final pillar kicked out. He was bankrupt in every way that mattered. Colette received the news at her foundation. She didn't cry. She went very, very still. Then she methodically cleared her desk into a wastebasket, placed a single call to her lawyer, and walked out, leaving her lavender heels in the middle of the floor. Her perfect world, the identity she'd built so carefully, was revoked. She was nothing but a disgraced socialite with a talent for spending other people's money. Emmett was found by his dealer, Matteo, in a catatonic state in his studio, surrounded by the shredded remains of his own paintings. He was checked into a different, real facility this time. No one contested it. I hosted them each separately in my apartment, a victor's mercy or a final audit. Julian came, shrunken in his suit. The fire was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp curiosity. "Did you do this?" he asked, not looking at me, staring at the cityscape. "Do what?" I poured him a whiskey, the good stuff he could no longer afford. All of it, the leak, the ghost, the setup. He finally met my eyes. "You were always the smartest. I just never thought you had the nerve." I handed him the glass. "The trustees have evidence, Julian. Digital fingerprints, motive. You played the game too hard." A bitter smirk twisted his lips. "And you didn't play at all. You just curated the board." He took a long drink. "I hope it's worth it, living in this mausoleum, all alone." Colette was more direct. She sat perfectly upright, her hands clasped, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "You won," she stated. "There were no winners, Colette. The trust is frozen. The family is destroyed." "Don't." Her voice was a whip crack. "Don't you dare be sanctimonious with me. You calculated this. You knew the clause. You knew we'd tear each other apart. You just made sure you were holding the pieces when it was over." She leaned forward. "Was it always the plan? From the first quarterly review?" I said nothing. Silence was the only truth I could offer her. She stood up, a deranged kind of dignity in her posture. "You'll be alone with that money, Sloane, and you'll see us in every reflection, in every quiet room." Grandmother's conditional love bought you a very large, very empty house. She left without another word. I didn't visit Emmett. There was no point. The brother I'd known was gone, dissolved in a cocktail of pharmaceuticals and inherited pressure. He was a ghost of my own making. The official notification from Sterling and Vale arrived on heavy, watermarked parchment. It was legalese, but the conclusion was a single, staggering sentence. Upon the final adjudication of the disqualifications, the entirety of the Victoria A. Hawthorne Trust would vest solely in the beneficiary Sloane Margaret Hawthorne. $54 million. Mine. I should have felt something. Elation, power, relief. I felt nothing. A vast, hollow silence. I walked through my apartment, touching the cold marble, the sleek steel, the art that was an investment, not a passion. It was all just inventory. I went to the vault, the real one, in the sub-basement of the building, behind a retinal scanner. Inside, on an isolated server, was the truth. The real logs, the unedited files of my manipulations. The proof that the ghost was mine, that the laptop trail was a fiction, that I had engineered every step of their mutual destruction. I stared at the server's blinking lights. This was the final piece, the ultimate insurance. With this, I could reverse it all, if I needed to. I could prove the conspiracy was mine. My hand hovered over the destruction command. A single keystroke to wipe it into digital oblivion. To make the lie I'd sold to Sterling the unassailable truth. But I didn't press it. Truth was no longer the point. Control was. This server wasn't a secret to be destroyed. It was the deed to my victory. The only thing that proved I had been the architect, not the default. The only thing that proved I had won. I locked the vault. Weeks bled into months. The legal battles raged, but they were rearguard actions. My siblings fought for scraps, settlements to avoid total destitution. I authorized small, discretionary payments from the trust's operating fund. A pittance, really. A monthly allowance that felt less like generosity and more like the upkeep of a living museum exhibit. My exhibits. Julian in a modest apartment, trading stocks with his last 1,000. Colette volunteering at a library, her name meaningless. Emmett in a permanent haze in a nice facility. I became what grandmother had, in her twisted wisdom, designed the sole heir. The custodian of the Hawthorne legacy. I sat on the boards. I approved the investments. I lived in the silence. One evening, at a charity summit, the new, respectable one that had replaced Colette's foundation, a young journalist approached me. "Miss Hawthorne," she gushed, "your family's story is so inspiring. To rise above such public difficulties, to carry the legacy forward alone. What's the secret?" I looked at her hungry, ambitious eyes. I saw Colette. I saw Julian. I saw myself once. I gave her the smile I'd perfected, part grace, part sorrow, all steel. "The secret," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the hushed room, "is understanding that family isn't just who you're born to. It's what you're willing to protect." She nodded, scribbling notes, already crafting the headline, "The Last Hawthorne, Resilience After the Storm." I turned away, my gaze finding my reflection in a dark window. I saw the elegant woman in the couture gown, the victor, the survivor. And for a fleeting second, behind my own eyes, I saw the ghost, the puppeteer in the vault, the sister who had traded her family for a fortune. Then the moment passed. The reflection solidified into the only face that mattered now, mine. The transaction was complete. I had paid the price grandmother always intended. I had inherited everything, and I had lost nothing that I hadn't already sold. When four siblings are pitted against each other in a vicious trust fund war with a last one standing clause, the most observant sister orchestrates a silent coup, manipulating her family's greed and fear to inherit a fortune and a lifetime of perfect, lonely victory. Was Sloane a ruthless genius who played the only game her family offered? Or did she become the true monster her grandmother's will created? And so, another story finds its place by the fireside. I hope it kept you company, whether on a long road, during a quiet evening, or in the moments you needed a story to step into. This has been a Heartlight saga, and there are always more secrets to uncover. If this journey stayed with you, if you felt the chill or the mystery settle in, I would be so grateful if you'd let me know. Leave a comment below and tell me what part of the story lingered with you the longest. Your thoughts not only mean the world to me, but they help shape the tales I tell next. Like the video, share with someone who might like the story, and subscribe the channel Heartlight Saga. And if you're yearning for another story right now, the story doesn't have to end. I have another tale waiting for you, from my hearth to yours. Thank you for listening. Until the next story begins.